This is an outline of some of the key points from chapter 7 of Kenneth Samples' book, Without a Doubt, which is addressing the historical reliability of the Gospels. Quote from this chapter: "The Christian faith depends on the historical nature and accuracy of the unique claims, character, and credentials of Jesus Christ." Since the Christian faith is grounded on history, we definitely want to know that the Gospels are historically reliable, since the Gospels are where we get most of the information in Jesus' life from. Evidence 1 that Samples provides: the New Testament documents are the best attested documents of antiquity in terms of total number of manuscripts. This is kind of interesting. Just because we have a lot of copies of something, it doesn't automatically mean that it's true. Simple modern day example: we have a lot of copies of Superman I think it's number 75 that contains the death of Superman. All right, does that mean that there actually was a metropolis which had this guy named Superman die fighting someone named Doomsday and then somehow rising from the grave later or coming back to life? No, right? So just because we have a lot of copies that say something doesn't mean it's true. All this is trying to show is that if we have a lot of copies of a document and all those copies say the same thing, then likely they accurately portray what the original copy contained. All right, so for the numbers, we have 5,000 individual Greek manuscripts, 8,000 copies of the Latin Vulgate. Without these, there are still thousands of manuscripts from commentaries and sermons that can be used to piece together the entire New Testament. And these are from the early church fathers in the 2nd to 5th centuries. Really good stuff there. Something to point, though, just because it says we have 5,000 individual Greek manuscripts, that does not mean that we have 5,000 complete copies of the Bible written in Greek on papyri or codexes. All that's saying is that we have 5,000 copies. Some of those copies, or actually a large portion of them, are just fragments or even just portions of a book or just a book or a couple books together. So it doesn't mean that we have actually 5,000 copies of the New Testament. But 5,000 copies is really, really good, because with the number of copies we have, we can then compare them and see what is different from amongst them. That is where Samples ended up saying textual criticism exists because of the Bible. Here's why. Because most ancient manuscripts have a very small number. Here is a chart I found listing the number of copies we have of some other works. You see we only got 8, 8, 2, 9 to 10. Oh, come to the Bible, you got 5,000 copies. Well outnumbering most other ancient documents. The next leading one, I believe, is the Iliad by Homer with about 600 copies. So the second best has about 600 copies. And obviously the Bible standing head and shoulders then above all the rest. If you have 20 copies of an ancient manuscript, that's considered exceptional. So when we look at the Bible and we see 5,000 copies, we have a ton to work with. So when people say that there are contradictions or errors within the copies, that's actually a good thing, because we have so many. We should expect there to be lots of differences, considering this is hand copying. Now, that's something to consider. What are the differences found within these copies? And really the differences are mostly spelling errors, grammar errors, punctuation, and the like. Anything which is significantly different is pointed out. For instance, in the Bible here, here's the NIV copy. If you turn to Mark 16, you see in the middle of Mark 16 here a big fat line that says the earliest manuscripts and some other ancient witnesses do not have Mark 16, 9 to 20. So we know what the differences are, and if it's a significant difference, we point it out within our Bibles with footnotes, or if it's something as drastic as Mark here, we do a whole line break within the chapter to show that, likely this is not in the Bible, because the earliest copies that we have do not contain this text. It's a later appearance. So the fact that we have so many copies and that we have them from earliest fragment dating to like early 2nd century, all the way through into the thousands AD. Complete copy of the New Testament at the early 300s, found in the Codex Sinaiticus. The fact that we have all of that is how we can point out and make notes like this here. So it's actually a very good thing that we have so many copies, and we don't need to worry so much about the differences, because the differences, if they're extreme differences like the Mark example there, if we just X those completely out of the Bible, nothing has changed doctrinally. So that's really good for us. Next point here that we have to work with: the interval of time between the date of the original authorship and the date of the earliest New Testament manuscript copies is extremely short. There's another chart showing some of these differences here. You see Matthew, author's lifespan 0 to 70, date of events that he's recording 4 BC to AD 30, date of writing, not exactly sure, but there's a span there, and then the earliest extant manuscript 200. So the elapse of time from the event to the writing, less than 50 years, and from the event to the manuscript, 200 years. And you see you have about the same for Matthew through Luke, even into Paul's letters. But then look at these other documents that we have in history. For instance, Josephus' Wars, the lapse of the event to the writing for Josephus could be anywhere between 10 to 300 years, with a lapse of the event to the first manuscript being into the thousands. And you see that is how most documents end up lining up. So the Bible is the only one where you see these short numbers. This is a very good thing, because if there is a short time frame in between the original and when the first copy is that we have, then it means that there likely is not as much corruption or potential for corruption. However, when it comes to all these others, even though we do have big gaps between sometimes when the event was and when the first writing was and when the original was to where the first copy is, we still trust these to be historically reliable. So we should then trust the Gospels to also be historically reliable. This is what brought John Warwick Montgomery to say, to be skeptical of the resultant text of the New Testament books is to allow all of classical antiquity to slip into obscurity, for no documents of the ancient period are as well attested in bibliography as the New Testament. So this, again, bibliography just is showing how the document has come down to us. Has it come down to us successfully in a way that we can trust it to accurately represent the original? That does not mean that everything in it has to be true. For that, we move into some other arguments. Here we see the historic statements made about Jesus by ancient non-Christian authors for the most part match as well with the gospel record. And Samples lists 10 Roman, Greek, and Jewish historians that confirm aspects of the Gospels, such as the fact, namely, the big one is that they directly say that Jesus was crucified by Pontius Pilate. But there are people outside of the Bible that affirm that Jesus did exist, he was a real person, that he was crucified under Pontius Pilate, and that his early fathers claim that his early followers claim that he rose from the grave. All very good news for us, because some people reject the Gospels because they say they're all Christian sources, or that it's only one source. To be honest, though, it's more than one source. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were 4 independent writers. So it's not just one source. We actually already have multiple sources, but some people argue that because they're all Christian, they're not reliable. But we do have non-Christians that also verify what's recorded in the Gospels. To the same extent, no, but they at least affirm, they don't contradict or deny what we find in the Gospels. Next piece of evidence here that Samples gave is that the authors of the 4 Gospels were eyewitnesses of Jesus' life themselves, or were closely associated with the witnesses. So again and again, they claim to be eyewitnesses. The one I really like is 2 Peter 1:16, where he says, we did not follow cleverly invented stories, right? But we're eyewitnesses of these events ourselves. Pretty big stuff to be able to say that. Next, the gospel writers intended to convey factual and historical information, and the writings of their historical content have been confirmed to a significant degree. For instance here, with John 5, 1 to 4, we hear this story of, and I'll open it up, John 5, 1 to 4, of this pool at this place named Bethesda, in which Jesus heals a man who's a paralytic. And what we know is that John, who was more of a philosopher, wasn't the historian like Luke, still provides tons of details in his writing here. So the healing at the pool, if this camera will focus on this one, says, sometime later Jesus went up to Jerusalem for a feast of the Jews. Now there is in Jerusalem, near the sheep gate, a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, and the paralyzed. One was there who had been an invalid for 38 years, and of course Jesus heals the man. Lo and behold, there's enough information here. The place of the pool, it's by the sheep gate. In Aramaic, it's called Bethesda. It's at Jerusalem. It even says when this was, the Feast of the Jews. There's enough information here that anyone living at that time could have found this place. And you see that we have actually found and discovered this today. Here is the pool, and here are the 5 columns for the colonnade. So this was a shaded place that people that were handicapped hung out all day. So if you lived at this time, you easily could have found this place in this location. Pretty interesting stuff. You're not going to be making that up. Maybe going back to this, you're not going to give such detail if you're lying. For example, if I were to tell you that I was at a certain movie theater at a certain time, at an exact road, and saw a specific movie, you would be able to verify that pretty easily by checking, saying, is there actually a theater there? Was this movie showing at this time? You could ask around, did you see a guy with a white spot on the back of his head? I'm not going to give such details if I'm making something up, right? Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully I explained that well enough. Next, the apostles' testimony becomes more credible when it's considered that they had nothing to gain from it and everything to lose. So the idea here is that the adversaries could have exposed their message as a lie, but they couldn't. We can trust their message because they had no motive to lie or deceive, and if they did lie and deceive, they violated everything Jesus taught about honesty and truth. And what do we actually see? Because the adversaries could not expose their message as a lie, they ended up, beating them and persecuting them. And there you see a picture, as tradition says, Peter being hung upside down. So did the disciples make any money for what they said and did? No. The people did sell money and give it to the disciples, but what did they do with that money? They gave it away to the poor. Did they receive earthly authority? Did they become best buds with the emperor? No. What did they get from it? You see from their own accounts, thrown in jail, stoned to death, that they were persecuted, thrown to the lions in the arena, burned as tiki torches, crucified, exiled, beat, poor, homeless, etc. It was pretty gruesome stuff that ended up happening to these men for claiming what they claimed. And you wouldn't do this, especially if you were claiming to be an eyewitness, if your testimony was not true. All of this helps lend support to the Gospels being true. Also adding to this, within the account, you see things such as Peter denying Jesus 3 times. The first witnesses were women, the first witnesses of the empty tomb were women, whereas the men were all afraid and in hiding. This doesn't sit well if this was a made-up story. If this was a made-up story, you would not have Peter, the ringleader of the apostles, lying or denying being a follower of Jesus. You would then have him facing up to that and not having such incriminating background within his testimony. You would not have the men hiding in fear while the women are out checking the tomb. It would be flipped around. The men would be the first eyewitnesses of the empty tomb. the women would be in hiding, because at this day and age, the women would not be considered as trustworthy witnesses in a court of law. So the fact that you have such damning evidence within the gospel accounts concerning the apostles' or disciples' own character, it shows historical integrity to maintain such accounts or flaws within its founders. All right, now, everything just presented, Samples doesn't use this, but it's commonly said that what he just shared falls into three forms of testing for historiography: the bibliographical test, the internal test, and the external test. So first you check and see, did the text come down to us accurately? Second, we see, what does the text say within itself about itself? And then third, is there external evidence to back this up? These three tests are applied to any ancient document, applied to any event that is claimed to have happened within history. It's commonly accepted and put into practice. So this isn't just something we're applying to the Bible. This is something that every historical event, every historical document must be subjected to. And the Bible passes these three commonly accepted tests with flying colors. Therefore, we should be able to say the Gospels are historically reliable, which is very good news for Christians. Second part of chapter 7 from Kenneth Samples' book, without a doubt, will address, are the Gospels and the records of his life myth or fact? Could it be that he did exist and this stuff happened, but years later somehow legend has crept into the account? So we'll be addressing that next.